Hello, I'm Frank Gerard. Welcome to this episode of Classic Country Conversations. And I am excited to have with me once again Larry Jordan. Larry is the author of the great book, Jim Reeves, His Untold Story. And you could get this book
I gotta
online
show it,
right,
Frank.
right there. Thank you, Larry. You could get this book on Amazon.com in both paper and in print copy as well as audiobook form, which I narrated. So I'm proud of that fact. I'm proud to have here Larry Jordan. Larry, welcome.
Hello, good to be with you again.
So, Larry, let's talk about influential women in the life of Jim Reeves.
Okay.
You
First one,
talk.
first one I think anybody would think of would be his wife of 17 years, Mary Reeves.
Of
I know
course.
that over the years, many fans from around the world, from multiple generations, had an opportunity to meet Mary because she traveled extensively. Even when Jim was alive, she would accompany him, like on a trip to Europe, etc. But she went to South Africa. She went to Europe on her own. Many fans just simply ran into her when they visited the Jim Reeves Museum in Nashville, which regrettably is no longer there. So a lot of people know Mary, and we have a debt of gratitude to pay her because without Mary, Jim would have never scored 34 charted hits after his lifetime. No other artist in the history of recorded music has done that. Not Elvis and not even the Beatles. And that was thanks to Mary's taking back catalog, unreleased material, overdubbing, releasing this over a period of years, decades really. And that's how Jim scored all those hits. He even beat the Beatles, kept them from the top of the British charts for 5 weeks in 1966 with the song Distant Drums.
Wow.
So
So,
another
so
woman,
Mary was it. Mary was the Mary was the big influence in Jim's life, and that was it. No other women.
not quite.
Ah,
Uh, there was, well, let's put it this way. Mary did not get Jim a contract with RCA Victor. Mary did not get Jim signed to a contract on the Grand Ole Opry. Mary did not get Jim a USO tour over the Christmas holidays in 1954, a tour to Europe headed by Forrest Tucker. Mary did not get Jim a March of Dimes train tour that featured select RCA artists. They left New York, traversed the country all the way to the Midwest, turned around and went back. Along the way, the various artists, everybody from Billy Eckstine to Vaughn Monroe, J.P. Morgan, and others performed to raise money for polio. Mary did not get Jim the job of hosting a 1 hour daily network radio show on the ABN radio network over 300 stations. He was backed by the Owen Bradley Orchestra, and it was the first time he met the Anita Kerr singers. Mary did not get Jim as substitute host on the Red Foley show, actually Ozark Jubilee, during the summer of 1958. And Mary certainly did not sit down and tell her husband that his singing was all wrong. But there is a woman who did do that.
who was that
That
woman?
was B. Terry. I'm glad you asked. And I'm glad, I know that you know that because you narrated the audiobook, but I just want to give you a little picture of B. Terry. She was born in Texas, but she went out to California, created a new career. She was originally a commercial artist. I'm talking about doing artwork, not a singer or performer. Jimmy Wakely induced her to come out there. And I have a list. I've really got to refer to this list. She handled PR for luminaries like David Rose, Lionel Hampton, Nelson Riddle, Les Brown, Stan Kenton, Spike Jones, Ray Anthony, Russ Morgan, Artie Shaw, Red Nichols, Nat King Cole, Benny Goodman, and Lawrence Welk. And she helped bring Hank Snow to the US. She even boarded his horse for him. She was a hostess at a party that MGM threw for Hank Williams just a month before he died. She did work for Hank Thompson, Johnny Bond, Pee Wee King, Eddie Dean, Bonnie Guitar, Ned Miller, even Al Martino, the pop artist, and of course, Jim Reeves. And she was especially big in the cowboy realm She organized a big luncheon at the offices of Nudie Khan. This is the guy that did all those Western outfits that you know about.
Yeah.
And I have a picture also of them meeting. And it was a who's who that attended there. Gene Autry, Roy Rogers, Rex Allen, Tex Ritter, Pat Buttram, and many, many more. She also wrote fan magazine articles and so forth. So this was a very important and experienced PR person.
And tell us more. Tell us more. This is
Well,
fascinating.
she was introduced in 1953 to Jim Reeves by his first producer, Faber Robinson of ABBA Records. And Bee and Jim hit it off immediately. As I mentioned, she was from Texas, but not specifically Carthage, where he was from. And it's interesting because when they got to talking, Bee said, you know, I have an uncle that lives in Carthage. And Jim knew the man. I'm going to show you something as a visual here. So we want to get ready for this. Um, she, he said to her, Jim said to her, your uncle gave me a present for my high school graduation. Whereupon he pulled out of his pocket this pen that I'm showing you right now.
Wow.
And I happen to collect fountain pens, so this was a terrific find. It was actually manufactured in 1924.
That
And
is
this
the
was
pen?
it is the pen. But you may want to go back to just me so we can show the pen and get back there.
Yep. There you go.
There we are. And this is the pen that B. Terry's uncle had given Jim for his high school graduation. He carried it in his pocket. So I thought
Wow.
that was pretty cool. Very quickly, Jim and B developed a very close relationship. And I mean that in the sense, not just professionally. He would hide out at her Hollywood apartment when things got too tense. One of the earliest things that Jim said to B is that when she wanted to get in touch with him, and he could be anywhere because he toured so much, he said, think me. In other words, concentrate on Jim, and just like an ESP thing. And B said that when she did that, 9 out of 10 times, Jim would call her from anywhere on the road, any hour of the day or night. So there was something going on there, kind of an ESP thing. You know, I mentioned to you that Jim had signed with RCA. That was in April of 55. His first hit was Yonder Comes a Sucker. But then he had 4 duds, and he was literally in jeopardy of losing that RCA contract. So Jim was holed up at B. Terry's apartment in Hollywood Hills, and she sat him down and gave him a little lecture. And he respected her because of her business credentials. She said his singing was all wrong, that he was singing too harshly, too loudly, and at too high of a pitch. And she said, why don't you sing on record the way you do to me, softly and intimately? Because she knew he had very beautiful, rich lower tones. Unfortunately, at RCA, there was an engineer who was very stubborn, and he insisted that all the artists, not just Jim Reeves, stand 2 or 3 feet back from the microphone. So with B's encouragement, she told him, just tell him to turn up the volume, get in close to that mic, work that mic, take advantage of what's called the proximity effect. And so Jim pondered that. Right after B had said this to him, he went on the March of Dimes train tour. And I interviewed J.P. Morgan, not Jane Morgan, but J.P. Morgan was also a singer. She was on the tour. She's still alive, very wonderful woman. Fans may remember seeing her on the Johnny Carson show as a frequent guest. She was very witty. She was on Hollywood Squares. And she recalled that all the artists on the train to pass the time on this long cross-country tour would critique each other. They would take turns performing. Then they would write down on a slip of paper their candid assessments of each performance, but do it anonymously. Then the notes were folded up, put in a bag, and everybody had a bag, and they could retrieve, the notes and find out what people were saying about them. So this kind of compounded or reinforced B's recommendation that he lower the key and sing more softly. So he wrote a song called Am I Losing You while on that train. He gave it to B, and he also cut a demo, an acetate, and sent it to her. She sent him in reply a letter effusively praising him and saying, this is how you should sing. So when Jim went to RCA, he recorded Am I Losing You in that mellow style, but RCA just ignored that and left it sit on the shelf. However, when it was finally released, it was a hit, and that encouraged Jim to change his style to that mellow crooner style. And guess what the next record was? Four Walls. So you can
Oh,
see how B was very, very pivotal in how she got him to change. Now, I want to just point out one thing real quickly. I actually released that demo, very rare demo, on this CD. It was issued several years ago, and it's just been re-released. Jim Reeves, voice of the Nashville Sound. And among the tracks on the back of the 26 tracks, is that demo. You get to hear it in all its non-pristine manner. You hear the pops and clicks, but you get to hear Jim, how he's changed his delivery. Following that, I have a rare version from his network radio show that I had, and I overdubbed new vocal backgrounds and strings, and you hear how polished he is. I point this out because the evolution of Jim as a singer took place over the span of like 1 year. And when you contrast that rather raw demo, that was better than he had been singing, with how he managed to croon that so effortlessly on his network radio show, it is just mind-boggling how that happened. So, that was a big, big deal for Jim to make that change. Uh, B also helped him find song material. They would work over her dining room table. She got him booked everywhere you can imagine. At one point, Jim was so grateful that he bought her a car because she didn't really have a good car. She refused to accept it. As a matter of fact, she did a lot of work for Jim for which she received no remuneration at all. Jim also was jealous of her. There's a funny little story I'll tell real quick. She was good friends with Jack Hope, who was Bob Hope's brother. And one time, B got Jack Hope to accompany her to one of Jim's shows. And before the show started, Jim spotted her, knew she was going to be there, but she was sitting with this man he thought was her date. And he got very irate about that. He said, I thought you were going to be with me this evening. And no amount of explaining pacified him. And Jim did the worst show of his life. He got angry at the Blue Boys. It was just a nightmare. And unfortunately, Jim's temper got away from him on that occasion. And he sank any chances he had of being invited to be on the Bob Hope USO tour to entertain troops. But he did show up at B's house. She wouldn't answer the phone the next day. So he knocked on her door and apologized profusely. And I think that may be the last time that Jim got mad at B. They had a great relationship. A lot of funny stories that I've got in the book, and she is woven throughout that book. She was so influential. Near the end of his life, Jim wanted to start a supper club. B would have been a natural to manage it, not only because she could manage the talent that could be booked there, but she was an excellent cook. She even produced a cookbook in tandem with the TV soap opera Dallas that featured Larry Hagman. So this woman had a lot on the ball. And I felt gratified about being able to put her in my book because nobody knew about her up to that point. And when she
fascinating.
died, she specifically requested there be no obituary. So it's a story for another time how I even tracked down. She made notes that were copious notes, very accurate and verified. So this was somebody that deserved the credit that I gave her.
Really amazing. And I will say that you talk about Jim thinking of starting a supper club, and I know you talk about that in the book, is that I think especially in the 60s, supper clubs were just, all over the place. I think of stars like Vaughn Monroe had a very successful supper
Yes.
club, and Jim probably would have been so good at it. And with B, it could have been powerful. You think if Jim had lived, he and B would have wound up together? I
Uh,
can only
he had very,
speculate.
he at various times wanted to do that.
Yeah.
He actually, Mary confirmed that he had wanted to go to acting school and become a great actor. He shared that goal with B. Terry. He said, no, 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 please don't do that. You've got a great career in the music business. Don't forsake that. There are a lot of out of work actors. You don't need to be one. So she helped dissuade him from doing that. But by the way, that supper club that I alluded to, I'll have to look it up in my own book and remember where it was. But he had a plan that was going to be a mountain lodge supper club somewhere in it might have been in the California area. So it would have been a terrific thing. Jim was brimming over with creative ideas, and he had so much to look forward to. By the way, that ESP came into play when Jim's plane went down. Baby talked about how she retired to her back bedroom. Her sister lived with her for years, and she thought Jim, and she could foresee this crash scene, this plane, as having gone down near, she thought, windmills. There were tall metal structures. She just couldn't get that image out of her mind. And she wanted to call Nashville authorities and say, look for an area like that has a bunch of windmills. Well, it wasn't windmills. It was an electrical power tower grid. That B
Oh.
had seen that through ESP.
Right.
Um,
There's so many rich stories in this book, and we've
yes,
talked about this before. The book is 672 pages, and the audiobook is 40 hours, and every moment is just rich with detail. And you learn so much about Jim. I know I did. I thought I knew about Jim Reeves. I didn't know anything about Jim Reeves until I read your book and then, of course, narrated it. I'm putting up here on the screen for the folks in the viewing audience, how to get the book. You can get the Kindle version, you can get the paperback version, or you can get the audiobook version. Just go to Amazon.com and look up
worldwide.
worldwide. Jim Reeves, his untold story. Larry will be talking with you again. We'll continue to have installments like this,
Great.
folks, to just give you little bits and pieces of the life of the great Jim Reeves.
We
And
got a lot
Larry,
of fascinating things to talk about. If people want to comment and ask questions, maybe we could address some.
absolutely. So, anyway, thank you again, and we'll be talking again very soon. Larry, thanks for
Appreciate
your
it.
time.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.